There is a grain bin in a Holmes County barn that was filled with whole wheat in the fall of 2019. I visited in the spring of 2024. The farmer opened the bin and scooped a handful of grain. It was clean, dry, free of insect activity, and still viable for milling into flour. 4.5 years of storage in an unheated barn through 4 winters and 4 summers, without chemical fumigants or sealed containers. Without oxygen absorbers or the expensive equipment that the emergency food storage industry sells for hundreds of dollars per year. 1 cup of food-grade diatomaceous earth per 50 pounds of grain at filling time. That is the complete protocol. I want to tell you about March 2020 because it is the proof that the knowledge in that bin matters more than ever. In late March 2020, flour disappeared from grocery shelves within 72 hours of lockdown announcements. Not reduced, disappeared. The supply chain operates on a just-in-time model. When purchasing behavior shifted, the pipeline emptied faster than it could be refilled. For 6 to 8 weeks in many regions, flour was genuinely unavailable at retail regardless of price. The Holmes County family noticed the news with bemusement. Their bin had enough wheat to mill flour regardless of the supply chain. They did not buy extra flour in January. They simply had grain stored the way they always have. The shortage was not their problem. They had never created the dependency that made the shortage a problem. That dependency, the assumption that flour will be on the shelf, is what the $3 bag of diatomaceous earth prevents from being catastrophic. Grain deteriorates in storage through 3 distinct mechanisms. Understanding all 3 is necessary to understand why diatomaceous earth addresses one of them definitively, and why the complete Amish protocol addresses all 3. The first mechanism is insect infestation. Grain weevils, flour beetles, Indian meal moths, and grain mites are the primary insect pests of stored grain. They are present in virtually every grain storage environment because their eggs are frequently present in harvested grain before storage begins. At room temperature, a single female grain weevil can produce up to 200 offspring in 1 generation. Under favorable conditions, insect populations in stored grain can reach densities that render the entire grain supply inedible within 3 to 6 months. This is why flour purchased from the grocery store typically goes bad within 6 months, even when stored properly. The milling process kills some eggs through heat and mechanical action, but does not sterilize the flour. Eggs that survive hatch in your pantry. Diatomaceous earth addresses insect infestation through a physical mechanism. Microscopic silica particles damage the waxy cuticle of insects, causing rapid desiccation. At 1 cup per 50 pounds of grain, the DE particles coat the grain surface and the spaces between grains throughout the bin. Death occurs within 24 to 72 hours of exposure. Eggs that hatch within the DE-treated grain encounter the same lethal environment. Food-grade diatomaceous earth is classified as generally recognized as safe by the FDA for use in grain storage at concentrations up to 2%. DE has no biochemical toxicity to mammals. The particles that cause insect death pass through human and animal digestive tracts without harm. The second deterioration mechanism is moisture. Grain stored above 14% moisture content supports fungal growth. Fungi like Aspergillus and Fusarium produce mycotoxins, which are potent carcinogens. Grain may appear intact but be unsafe for consumption. The moisture management component of the Amish protocol is addressed through container selection and bay leaf addition. Grain stored in breathable containers in a dry environment can manage moisture passively. Sealed containers require active desiccant inclusion. The third deterioration mechanism is oxidative rancidity. The oils in grain oxidize when exposed to air and light. This is why the Amish store whole grain rather than flour. The bran layers protect the inner starch and germ from oxidation during storage. Milling is done as needed because the milling process dramatically increases surface area and therefore oxidation rate. The complete 3-layer Amish grain storage protocol addresses all 3 deterioration mechanisms simultaneously with materials that cost approximately $6 total per 50-pound batch. Layer 1. Diatomaceous earth for insect control. Use food-grade DE only, not pool-grade, which is not safe for consumption. Add 1 cup of food-grade DE per 50 pounds of grain, and mix thoroughly before adding to the storage container. Mixing distributes DE throughout the grain mass rather than concentrating it on the surface. A clean shovel or a large bucket works for mixing. Inhale as little DE dust as possible during mixing. The fine particles are mildly irritating to the respiratory mucosa in concentrated dust form. A dust mask or simple cloth over the nose during mixing is sufficient protection. Layer 2. Bay leaves for secondary insect deterrence. They contain compounds like eucalyptol that are repellent to grain insects. Place dried bay leaves throughout the grain at a rate of approximately 1 leaf per 2 pounds of grain. Bay leaves provide a secondary deterrent layer that discourages insect activity at the bin edges, where DE concentration may be lower. The Amish grow bay laurel as a kitchen herb and use dried leaves from the previous year's harvest for 0 incremental cost. Layer 3. Container selection and moisture management. Whole grain for long-term storage is best stored in one of 3 container types. Food-grade metal bins, like galvanized trash cans with tight lids, prevent rodent intrusion and are widely available. Food-grade plastic buckets with gamma seal lids create an airtight seal and are cost-effective at $4 to $6 each. Traditional wooden grain bins allow natural moisture exchange that prevents condensation buildup in dry barn environments. For suburban households, food-grade 5-gallon plastic buckets stored in a cool, dry interior location are the practical equivalent. A family of 4 requires approximately 365 pounds of stored grain per year, occupying about 48 cubic feet. The hand-crank grain mill for converting stored whole grain to flour as needed is the final component. Quality manual mills produce flour in about 20 minutes per pound and are built to last over 20 years. Over time, the mill pays for itself, saving significant money compared to purchasing stone-ground whole wheat flour at retail prices. I want to return to March 2020 for the economic calculation, because the 2020 supply chain disruption produced the clearest data point on what grain storage is actually worth in non-standard conditions. In January 2020, a 50-pound bag of winter wheat was available for approximately $18 to $22. In April 2020, the same 50-pound bag was selling for $45 to $65 on the same platforms where it had been available. In some regions, it was simply unavailable at any price for 6 to 8 weeks. The household that had stored grain in November 2019 had not spent $65. They had spent $20. The DE to protect it had cost $3. The total outlay for storage-ready grain, $23. The replacement cost in April 2020 for households that had not stored, $65 for the grain alone, if they could find it. The economic case for grain storage is not only about the long-term arithmetic of home milling versus retail flour purchase. It is about the resilience value of having a food supply that does not depend on a 3-day retail inventory pipeline being continuously functional. The 2020 disruption lasted 6 to 8 weeks. A 2024 analysis identified 14 scenarios that could produce similar or longer disruptions. The grain bin is insurance that also pays interest in the form of lower food costs every year it is maintained. The 5-year cost for a family of 4. Year 1, 365 pounds of wheat, $146. 10 buckets with lids, $60. DE and bay leaves, $9. Total year 1, 2 15s. Years 2 through 5, annual grain purchase to replace consumed stock, $146 per year. Total 5-year cost, $799. Commercial equivalent for 5 years. Store purchased flour, $9,125. Commercial freeze-dried storage, $3,000 to $4,000. The whole grain protocol at $799 is 85 to 92% cheaper and produces fresher flour because it is milled as needed. The Holmes County family did not calculate this. They stored grain the way they always store grain because the family book said store grain. The entry predates any modern product by a generation. The grain bin in the barn has been continuously stocked since the property was established. The 2020 disruption was news they read about. It was not an experience they had. Drop in the comments how many months of flour you have in your house right now. Not what you plan to have. what is actually on your shelf. The gap between that and 12 months is what a $3 bag of DE and a sack of wheat closes for $23 in materials. The bin in Holmes County was full for the entire 6 weeks. The difference was $3 of DE and a family book entry.